So spring has started. It started early, and so when we planned this talk, I kind of told Aggie, "Gosh, I don't think I'm going to have any plants to actually bring to sell because everything's going to be totally dormant." And of course, you have all been out in your own garden, so you see that's not true at all. Things are growing rapidly, quickly, and so I actually do have some beautiful herbs to bring today. I want to start out by asking a couple questions. How many of you have been out to the farm in Vacaville? Anyone? A few people? How many of you have been out to the farm in the last 3 years? It's just gotten so big and so huge. It's people come out who haven't been there for a few years and they're surprised at how large we've become. How many of you grow herbs in your gardens? How many of you grow medicinal type plants? How many of you are growing culinary? Culinary plants for cooking. Oh, the important ones. And how many of you are growing herbs for other reasons, like bringing in pollinators or just because they're drought tolerant? Okay. Well, I'm hoping with this talk we kind of maybe shift your views a little bit on how important and fun it can be to grow herbs in the garden and kind of expand your dictionary about what an herb actually is. So when you come out to the farm, and we do have a retail nursery out, we call it a farm because it's part of a big farming community. It's out on 3 acres in the middle of the country. So when you come to my farm, you're coming there for plant material. And when you come to the farm, most of you have already seen this picture already, so it's not a surprise, but a lot of people come and they park in the parking lot and then they call the nursery from the parking lot and they say, I'm here, can I come and visit you? Because this is what's staring at them through their hungry dogs. And so oftentimes we get people that stop right there, they drive all the way up cautiously going, you have big dogs. But so I always like to point that out because we do get a lot of visitors every day that come out to see us and visit the garden. So wonderful, lovely dogs will greet you and will kind of clean out anything you have in your car that needs to be eaten. So I'm starting with this beautiful picture of basil. Okay, so basil is probably the first thing that comes to mind here in California when we think about an herb to grow. And so here's this luscious basil. People are going to go, where's the basil? Because I've already, in the last 2 weeks, had people out there at the farm saying, where's the basil? Because it's 70 degrees during the daytime. So I didn't actually bring any basil today, but we're going to talk about a few kinds of basil. So this is one of the herbs that people think of as the main herb. I was in Turkey a few years ago, and it was funny, you notice there is this Turkish Viagra. I don't know what that is, and they wouldn't tell me what plant that was, but it was a bunch of plants sitting around. I don't know if it was one of those sticks or reeds or dried leaves or whatever, but the idea of what is an herb? How is it defined? And of course, here in the West, we think about eating, so we're thinking about eating herbs. But of course, throughout most of our history, herbs have been used medicinally, and that is the way that herbs have moved from place to place throughout the world. One of my favorite herbs is also one of the most painful herbs, stinging nettles. And so when I first planted stinging nettles out at our farm 20 years ago, I planted some in pots, I planted some in our garden so we would have it available. And our farm, our nursery is actually on land that has been owned by my parents since the 50s and was owned by my grandparents since the 20s. So my dad took one look at that plant and he said, oh no, nettles, that was from the Depression. I'm not eating nettles ever again. We had to eat nettles. In the spring was the only green we had in Missouri. I said, well, Dad, it turns out nettles are perfect for you. They're a really important medicinal plant. They clean out the liver, they clean out the kidneys, and now we use them as a tea plant when people have problems with allergies. And we use them also because they're high in calcium. So I always say this is an important herb to intake into your body every day because, of course, starting in your 30s, our calcium levels decline rapidly. So Nettle tea, it turns out, is something we should be drinking every day. It's a weed though, right? Calendula, here's a plant, if you've ever put it out in your garden, you go, oh my gosh, what a weed, because you never get rid of it. And it flowers very cheerily all winter long. It's a very important plant in the medicinal world, and if you like cosmetics, any sort of natural cosmetics, it's usually included because it's an anti-inflammatory. So it's used in eye creams, for example, and it's used in tea blends for the digestive system. This is a bin of different roots and stems, all kinds of herbs and flowers that were used in Turkey to make natural dyes. So they had made various mordants to it, and they made dyes for rugs that then cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So right now they're in their raw form, but there's like, this is actually, I think, just chamomile here, this is thyme, this is some sage. So some of these very weedy products that we think of are actually used in so many different fashions. Patchouli, we think of as that herb from the 60s, but it's actually the base note in almost every very expensive perfume you buy. Extremely important. You don't smell the patchouli in these very expensive perfumes, but it's theirs because that's what kind of centers all of the other fragrances of these very expensive perfumes. And white sage, which is a California native and is used by native peoples here as a smudge plant. Have most of you heard of a smudge? It's like an incense stick, and it's used to cleanse out an area and prepare it for a spiritual happening. So native to California, you find it all over here in the foothills. Also considered an herb. So the classic definition, what we think of an herb is, we always think of, oh, it's something I can eat. But of course, it's any plant that has been or is useful to man. Not grapes necessarily, but any of the other plants that we've used medicinally or for culinary purposes or dyeing or fragrance, any of those things that we've used over many centuries. So some are just historical now, we don't use them anymore, but we can enjoy them in the garden. Okay, so I have to start with enticing you with delicious pictures of plants I don't have to sell to you right now. The basils. So I always like to start out because so many people come into the nurseries right now and they want basils and tomatoes. Basils and tomatoes. It's that time because I'm in my shirt sleeves. It must be perfect for basil and tomatoes. So there's a good general rule to follow before you know it's time to plant out all of your summer herbs, things like basil, dill, tomatoes, peppers. If you can't take your morning coffee outside into your garden space and sit down butt naked for 5 minutes, it is not time to plant.
It's definitely not time then.
It's a really good rule. A little hard to follow in a community garden, but
I'm testing.
So the soil has to be warm. Not just the air, but the soil, because it's those roots that are going to be working before any of the tops are working. So I did bring some beautiful pictures of basil because they're coming out, and at the end of next month, all of your basils will start to be available, even though it's still too early, but we can't stop people. So by the end of March, we have basils ready to go, even though, when's your last frost date here? April?
March 10th.
March 10th? March 10th? Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us in Vacaville, we're April 5th. And so whenever I take off all of the plastic and say it's spring, it freezes that night. So.
Well, that's just
So these two basils, this one's called Pesto Perpetuo, this one's called Wild Magic. Pesto Perpetuo never blooms. So you know how you spend all your time picking out the blooms of basil to give up and finally just chop the whole thing down?
Yeah.
First of all, with your summer annuals, all of those kinds of herbs, if they start producing flowers and seeds, the first thing that says to you is, I'm hungry and I better reproduce because I'm going to die soon. Okay? And that's the whole purpose on this planet, is to produce seed and continue the next generation. So your whole goal, so that you can make pesto, is to stop that from happening. So, most of the herbs we're going to talk about today, you don't bother doing much with them. They're kind of weedy. They're easy to grow. They don't want much fertilizer. They don't want much water. They don't want a lot of fluff. But things like basil and cilantro and dill and parsley, they want lots of nitrogen. So if they start flowering, that tells you more nitrogen. You won't hear me say that hardly at all today, but more fertilizer. So not necessarily 50-0-0, but a good shot. We just do organic fertilizer, so we'll hit it with fish emulsion and sea kelp in the ground twice a month, which is really frequent compared to the rosemary, which we hit once a year if we remember. Okay, so more fertilizer and more water. So you generally don't put your basil and your rosemary really close together because they have very different water needs. So this one, the Pesto Perpetuum, never blooms, so you don't ever have to pick the blooms off. This one below, called Wild Magic, this is sterile. And so we let this one bloom because it brings tons of pollinators into your vegetable garden. It is gorgeous. This last winter, fall, winter, because it was kind of mild, I took pictures of it every day, and it did not freeze until December 31st.
Wow.
And we had basil and basil flowers and honeybees out there in the garden until December 31st. The previous year was December 6th, but this one always goes late in the season. Now, just in case you're wondering, that piece of paper I handed out, that is the PowerPoint presentation list, and so that just started with the last slide. So that if you wanted to write something down about an herb, you don't have to scramble to find the name of that plant. So here's 4 of our favorite basils, and we grow about 18 different kinds of basil. Again, that really yummy Genovese, lemon basil, the Thai basil, and you can tell that because of that red stem, and red rhubarb. These are all terrific summer growing annuals for cooking, for tea making. A lemon basil tea is a delicious iced tea in the summer, and also just like to use as a salad green. And if they go to flower, we always start pinching them back as quickly as we can, and you can eat the flowers. So you'll notice this one here, the Thai basil, is starting to flower here. So you want to cut those flowers off, give it some fertilizer, and then go ahead and throw those flowers in your salad or onto your salmon. Do something with it. I always think it's a good way to get back at the flowers. I'm going to eat you. I'm going to grow. I'm going to eat you. So, but definitely you can eat the flowers of basil, and any herb that the leaves are edible, the flowers are edible. Okay, so people always come in and they want to know all the special plants that have edible flowers. They're going to, I want an edible flower garden. What flowers are edible? And the first thing I tell them is rosemary, sage, parsley, dill, cilantro, basil, oregano, thyme. All of those things, the flowers are edible. So start with just your basic herbs before you have to go off and find other plants. Although I will show you a couple of great unusual plants for using for edible flowers. So just like we talked about with the basils, these have to go in when the soil's a little warmer, more water, more fertilizer. How many of you are growing primarily in containers? Okay. Yes, with containers, it's even more important with these summer annuals to keep up on your fertilizing. So some people, they'll put them in and they'll bring them back to me a couple months later and they'll go, gosh, my basil looks terrible. I said, well, when did you last fertilize it? And you're like, fertilize? I don't know. Never. Okay, it needs some fertilizer, and if it's in a container, it's going to need fertilizer more often, even once a week. So very different than our perennial.
Put it in containers.
So we'll talk about the annual herbs. We'll continue with those first. This is boring old parsley. And both the curly parsley on top and the flat leaf parsley, which is by far the more popular one on the bottom. And by now everybody knows parsley is very nutritious for you. You shouldn't just stick that little sprig off to the side. You should be eating it. It's good for digestion. It's full of vitamin C and vitamin A. It's really good for you. So one other thing, and this is one of those things that can change people's minds like in a nanosecond. About 15 years ago now, when we first were open, I had a customer. She bought a little pot of parsley, she took it all the way out to her car, and she came back and she was so mad. She says, this parsley, it has a worm. It has a worm on it. I don't want a worm on my parsley. And so my employee, who's a master gardener, she looked at it and she goes, oh, that's not a worm. That's a caterpillar for the black-tailed swallowtail butterfly. And she went, oh, that's my caterpillar. I bought that here. You know, she was still going to eat her plant to the ground, but one word, caterpillar versus worm, totally changed her mind, especially knowing that caterpillar was going to become a beautiful butterfly. So if you're not going to grow some of these herbs for cooking, think about herbs that are going to be good for beneficials. And of course, butterflies have to have their whole life cycle, so some part of them has to eat down foliage. The caterpillar form is going to eat foliage, and it loves things like parsley, cilantro, dill, lovage, chervil, fennel, all of those things. So many of our butterflies will eat. So even if you just leave a few of those in the garden and be kind of weedy, why not? Because at one time of the year, you're going to come out and it's going to look like a Christmas tree with all those beautiful caterpillars, not worms. Okay, so parsley, we should all grow in our gardens, and if we're not growing it for us, let's grow it because we do want to attract and keep all stages of butterflies in our garden. I have cilantro here on the left side, and it's even going to flower up here. How many of you grow cilantro? How many of you cuss out cilantro every single year because it goes to seed like really fast? It's not just me cussing at it, right? Okay, cilantro is actually a cool weather annual, so you should be putting it in the ground now. The end of February, March, April, May. Give up all that chili pepper growing stuff where you have a hot chili pepper and a cilantro growing together. It's not going to happen. Cilantro wants high humidity and temperatures that are about 85 or so. So that doesn't sound like us in July at all. So give up in the middle of the summer, grow it in the spring, and then grow it again in the fall. There is a great substitute, and it's the plant on the right side, this Vietnamese coriander. And so this is used a lot for Southeast Asian cuisine, Korean, barbecue, all kinds of Asian cuisine. And it has this wonderful cilantro flavor with a little bit of a lemony hint to it. It's a wonderful substitute that looks great and grows well in our gardens all summer long. Hardy perennial, so it does well. Our stock plant in our gardens have been there for at least 15 years. Hot, cold, flood, drought, the whole thing. So easy to grow. So if you're looking to have cilantro at your fingertips during the summer, that's the one to do. And then we have dill here going to seed, and chervil. How many of you cook with chervil? Does anybody here cook with chervil? You can never find it, which is why you need to grow it. And I actually did bring some chervil today. Whenever you're cooking any French cuisine, any white sauces, anything like that, fish in a French way, they ask for chervil. So if you are looking for that kind of herb, it's best to grow your own. You're never going to see it at a store. Again, these are two plants that you would grow, if not for you, for pollinators. They're both actually cooler weather annuals. So your dill starts going to seed usually in June and July. You can either let it go to seed and let the seed fall down and plant itself, or you can collect the seed and have fresh dill seed to cook with and to use for your pickles. Both of these need more water, more fertilizer, okay, just like the basils. So we're going to leave that whole world of more water and more fertilizers because we're actually living in the world of no water. And of course, we also want to reduce runoff of all of our fertilizers. So we really want plants that are like no water and will just grow on their own and never need much care. And fortunately, a lot of herbs completely work in that kind of situation. So I'm going to start with the most common culinary herb you can think of, and that is rosemary. Now, how many of you grow rosemary? I always know when someone from the East Coast comes to our nursery because they go, oh, I saw rosemary in the Walmart parking lot. It's growing in the ground. I say, I know, we don't have to dig it up and move it into our basement in the wintertime. It's in California. So there's many kinds of rosemary. Again, if you're not growing rosemary for you, grow rosemary for the honeybees because it's in bloom right now, and it's one of the first good foraging plants in in habitation in our gardens that you can add to your garden. I brought two different ones today. One is called Mozart, and it's this kind of a semi-trailing variety. The other one's an upright one called Blue Spires. So you can get rosemaries that are 6 inches tall, all the way up to 10 feet tall. So it's a good idea to really look at what variety you're growing. Because we no longer just have rosemary, or lavender, or an oregano. Now we've got 50 selections of rosemary, depending on what kind of flower you want, and how tall you want, and everyone claims to have the nicest ones for cooking. We found that Blue Spires is one of our favorites for cooking. And it works well in a container. It only gets about 2.5 or 3 feet tall. Now we've entered that no water, or very little water. So this is the perfect time of year to get your plants established. You put them in the ground, you plant them on the high side. I used to always think that all these gardeners were lazy when you'd see pots where you actually saw like an inch or 2 of soil sticking up out of the ground. But actually, for these kinds of plants, these Mediterranean plants, that's what you want. You don't want water to collect around the main stem of the plant. When it does, that is when you get root rot. And with the salvia, I'll show you a really lovely example in my own garden to prove to you that we do it all the time, even in our gardens where we try not to water. So you want to get plants established by watering them deeply. So I get a lot of people that come in and go, gosh, my rosemary, I have to water it like every other day. I said, well, how long do you water for? I don't know, 3 minutes on my timer. And I go, well, let's see, a half a gallon, an hour, you water for 3 minutes. So you've given it like 3 tablespoons of water. First of all, it's really lazy. The roots are like right under the surface of the soil. It's not drought tolerant at that point. It's not going to be resistant to any diseases or insects attacking it. And yeah, every day it's thirsty because it goes, gosh, you gave me 2 tablespoons. Okay, you want lots of water infrequently. So when we turn on our water in our gardens, and we only turn on our water once a week, except that area where we have basil planting, but everywhere else we turn it off once a week at the most. And this summer, depending how much water costs us, it may be less than once a week. And when we turn it on for 45 minutes. We have spots we can dig down into the garden, and we want water at least a foot deep. Okay, so you want water to penetrate down deeply for these perennials to get established. Really important, and that way, if you have to undergo massive amounts of water stress, for example, if we're told by the city, sorry, you can only water once every 2 weeks, or if you go away on vacation and you have some wonderful teenager water for you who goes, oh yeah, I forgot, sorry. And you don't get water for 2 or 3 weeks, things will stay established, and most importantly for the culinary herbs, they will taste better. Okay, your herbs that grow fast and fluffy, they don't have much fragrance and they don't have much essential oil, which means they don't have much flavor. So you don't want fast-growing herbs, you want moderate-growing herbs. So that's why you don't give a lot of fertilizer. So in our gardens, we fertilize with a slow-release organic fertilizer, like a blood meal, bone meal mix, once a year. We're lazy. I mean, except for those basils and parsley over in that one corner, everything else gets fertilized once a year, and then the gardens, all of them get heavily mulched. So we don't have time to fertilize all the time. And the plants don't want it if they are mining the soil properly, if you really concentrate on getting them too deep. So these are 3 beautiful culinary salvias. The green one is called Bergarten sage. It's a beautiful green leaf that you'll find a lot of chefs use to flash fry. Okay, so wonderful. And then the golden and the purple sages are other good culinary varieties. Any salvia that has the word officinalis is a culinary sage, a classic culinary sage. And they may have just a little bit different varying amounts of bitterness or strength to them. They're also used for their flowers, of course, and have beautiful edible flowers. And they are the perfect plant to have in your garden to tell you whether you're watering incorrectly, because they don't like it when you overwater. And people rarely, we find out, underwater in their gardens. Everybody overwaters, particularly their herb gardens. So when salvia, when the culinary sage gets overwatered, it doesn't take too long before it looks like So we call that flagging, where you see like one branch die out and then the next branch dies out. And I don't know, have you seen this before on your own plants, especially rosemary or lavender is another good one, or sages? Yeah, this is classic root rot symptoms. And the problem is, first of all, a lot of people, they'll look at that first flagging branch and they'll go, oh my gosh, it's thirsty. And they run out and water. They don't go out and tug on it or dig in the soil a little bit, they just run out and water it. And then 3 days later, it works a little worse. So they go, oh my gosh, I thought this was drought tolerant, I better water it some more. And pretty soon what you've done is you've taken a plant that had 2 or 3 roots that weren't dead. Everything else had basically rotted, and you rotted the whole thing. And so yeah, it looks thirsty because the root system has completely collapsed under the soil. So it's one of those things to go in, dig in the soil if your plants start to look not very healthy. Tug on them a little bit, are they well rooted? Before you start adding water, especially with our herbs, because so many of them are native to the Mediterranean basin. So you really want to concentrate on keeping them dry, not running in and watering them more. So, and then there's one really great little story about salvia, and that is there's a lot of history and there's a lot of folklore behind the herbs. It's kind of the fun part of herbs because some of them, or many of them, have very long traditions, 1,000 years or more. And so a lot of folklore has developed around them. And with salvia and rosemary, there's this belief. So if rosemary grows well in your garden, it means that the woman rules the house. We have so much rosemary that's like everything. It's all happy and healthy and perky. On the other hand, if salvia, which is the herb of wisdom, if that grows well in your garden, the man rules the house.
Oh, that's my problem.
There's my salvia. This is taken out of our garden, so this is what happens with just a couple times where the watering wasn't set properly and it's getting too much to one area. So my poor husband, he doesn't have a chance. Lots of other great culinary herbs. Probably one of the herbs that people grow the most and use the least are the thymes. So everybody sticks a thyme in their garden, and then they let it grow for about a year, and then it looks terrible. And then they might try to cut it back, and then it looks terrible still for longer than they want it to look, and then they rip it out, and maybe they come and get another one, and maybe they go, whatever. I just won't grow thyme, it's not useful. The number one thing about growing thyme for culinary purposes is that thyme is the best salt substitute. The very best salt substitute. And I never paid much attention to it until a couple of years ago when my mother had to be totally salt-free, nothing. And so we had to really learn to cook differently all of a sudden because she liked salt. So we used a lot of thyme in cooking. So there's our regular thyme, like English, and today I think I brought the French thyme, which has kind of your classic flavor of thyme. But there's other thymes, like the lemon thyme over here, caraway thyme, which has the flavor of caraway. Wonderful flavors to add to your cooking. Easy to grow in containers. If you do overwater them, they're much more willing to work with you. They won't immediately die out like the salvias do. They're easy to grow. They are short-lived, so thymes only live about 3 years.
Oh, really?
They're short-lived in general. Sometimes people get one that's just happy and live 7 or 8 years. So a lot of times, the thymes you put in as ground cover looks great in year 1 and okay in year 2, and then really crummy in year 3, and then year 4 you've ripped it out. So the one thing I like about the caraway thyme, this one right here, is that it is a long-lived evergreen ground cover. So it smells great, it tastes great, it's long-lived, people mow it, has a beautiful flower, and it's believed that the garden fairies live on thyme flowers, so I'm always hopeful that there will be some garden fairies living there, cleaning up my garden when I'm not able to. Wonderful, easy to grow plants, but many of them are shorter lived, so after 3 years, yes, you go ahead and you replace But use them in your cooking, and if you're not cooking with them, make tea out of them, okay? It's great digestive tea, and people think tea, but especially ones like lemon thyme and lime thyme and orange thyme, they're excellent for cooking with, and they're excellent for tea making. And now, if you're one of those, I don't remember the name of them anymore, but they used to just be bartenders, but now they have some mixologists or something they're called. They use a lot of these flavored thymes in their alcoholic beverages also. So if you go buy a $12 martini now, you can get like a lavender martini or a lime thyme martini. So they use them for a lot of other things. Lavender, lavender, lavender. We have several fields of lavender at the farm. Some of them are used only for essential oil. Some of them are used for fresh cut lavender. Some are used for crafting. And then all of them are used because we take cuttings off them. We do all of our own cuttings at the nursery. We don't buy them in. So it gives us a chance to really learn a lot about each type of lavender. So you'll notice this is early June. This was about 3 years ago actually, because last year by early June everything was in full bloom because of the weather change. But you'll see some varieties are way ahead. Some varieties haven't even started opening the flowers yet. So each one of these rows is a different variety. So you can have lavender blooming from March 1st, well, actually I've got some Spanish lavender blooming right now, all the way up until Christmas. Different varieties are going to bloom at different times, and some of them are going to bloom multiple times. So the important thing to remember is it is a Mediterranean native. It does not want to live in the middle of your lawn. If you're watering it with lawn water, it's not going to be long lived. Our field gets watered once every 10 days. And there are some growers that never, ever irrigate in the summer. Okay, so not much water. I can't emphasize that enough. Two of our most popular ones are both English lavender. If the name is angustifolia, it means English lavender. They're not native to England at all. They're native to North Africa, but they went back with the Crusaders, and so they've been in England for more than 1,000 years. And they are actually called the herb of war. Hard to believe because we use it in our eye pillows and we're very calm with it now. But it's called the herb of war because it has incredible antiseptic qualities about it and the ability to staunch blood flow. So back in the Crusades, if you got bayoneted, you didn't have a whole lot of choices. Lavender was one of them, and it actually was pretty effective at wound cleansing. So you notice that lavender also does not just come in purple. So this is one called Edelweiss, a true white lavender. These are the lavenders, the English lavenders are the lavenders that we use for cooking sweets. So people say, what lavender do I use for cooking? It depends whether you're doing sweet or savory.